Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Spectrum's webinar. My name is Sophia. I organize Spectrum's webinars for you and bringing the community together through learning at Spectrum. So for those of you who are new to Spectrum, so aside from organizing online events such as this webinar, we also do in-person events. We offer curated workspaces for community experience and also connections to expand your business. So for today, we are privileged to have HR experts on the panel to discuss on HR changes through COVID-19, the challenges and opportunities. So let me introduce the panelists for today. So first up, I have Evelyn Chow. Evelyn is the founder and principal consultant of Decode HR, a strategic HR consulting firm based in Singapore. So she works with clients to develop strategies and programs in areas of strategic workforce planning, talent acquisition, talent management, and leadership development, amongst a few others. So she's passionate about leveraging technology and helping clients understand HR technology to help propel their human capital programs to greater heights. So she's also an advocate of Agile HR. So Evelyn will be sharing her perspective in areas where she works closely with her clients on their HR strategies and requirements, especially during the COVID-19 period. So next up, I have Lee Nalalingam. So Lee manages the people function at Aviva. He is a HR leader with more than 15 years of experience working with over 100 MNCs, spanning more than 70 countries. So he has built 2 multi-million dollars consulting teams and delivered over $100 million in cost savings and efficiencies during the course of his career. So with his vast experience, his perspective being in and working with MNCs will add great insights into this panel discussion. And next we have Nina Alatsuri. Nina is the founder and CEO of Shopa AI. Shopa AI is founded in 2017 to disrupt the traditional search business. So she is an electronics engineering professional and has been an entrepreneur for 21 years by choice. So her perspective and technology adopted in HR recruitment and trends, especially in the current situation, will add useful takeaways into this panel discussion. So the moderator for today is Jeremy Ong. So Jeremy is the co-founder and heads the people experience management in Golden Equator. So his role focuses on talent management. He also champions the company culture and is the HR strategic business partner to the various businesses under the Golden Equator Group, which includes Spectrum. So who best to moderate today's panel session? So before I hand it over to Jeremy, participants, if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the platform. So over to you, Jeremy, without further ado. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The COVID-19 global pandemic has created an impact affecting workers, leaders, and businesses globally. Many nations had to declare a state of emergency and impose lockdown protocols. Suffice to say, the coronavirus has ushered in the world's largest work-from-home experiment. Companies and workers globally were thrown into a deep end of something that they have never experienced before in their lives. This has raised many questions. How do companies manage the sudden shift? How do HR leaders tackle the challenge of keeping employees safe, engaged, and motivated? How does technology and innovation play a part in all this? Are there opportunities for positive transformation in our work culture, processes, and mindset? In the next hour or so, our distinguished panel will shed some light on these questions. So let's jump right in. First off, let's talk about key challenges that businesses and employees face during this transition. So to open the discussion, Evelyn, this is the first time Singapore has gone through a circuit breaker, and a lot of businesses had to shift to remote working, given that the authorities have clustered the essential and non-essential services. So as a HR consulting firm, many of your clients will have reached out to get advice on how to deal with the situation, including business continuity measures, best practice for remote working. So what were the initial challenges faced by businesses that needed to make this big adjustment? And how quickly were they able to do that?
Thank you, Jeremy. I would say that at the beginning, many companies were still trying to find their footing as to the right measures to adopt and to make sense of the measures and restrictions that the government agencies were introducing. I think if you recall, it first started with travel restrictions that got more and more stringent to the point where, travel was just not allowed at all. So during that time, indeed, for a couple of days, there was a lot of uncertainty, but we were able to work with our clients to put in place clear policies and processes that help them to understand, what it means to put in place these distancing measures, and how do you split your teams, and how do you make sense of, what is essential and non-essential services. So we had clients in the essential services sector as well, which meant that they still actually had to carry on with their operations. But it also meant being very careful, in working with them to ensure that the employees receive adequate protection while they continue with the operations of the company. And I think beyond that, I think many companies, have actually now put in place these measures. But beyond that, what we have observed was that companies that started first, even before the government actually introduced mandatory measures, companies that were more prepared, that put in more thought, were definitely able to anticipate what was coming and be better prepared for it. And we can certainly see that it made a difference in terms of very clear structured workflows, processes that were in place. And of course, with business continuity plans, which were very essential. But we also observed that in some instances, there wasn't sufficient redundancy built into the system, which meant that when it comes to splitting of teams, there were companies that struggled because they needed to make sure that there was adequate support and coverage at any one time. So that was something that I think some companies were not that well prepared for. So I think even now, companies can still continue to think about how they can train their teams to make sure that they can cover well for each other, and make sure that the services do not suffer and that teams are adequately trained. So I think that is still something that's very important for organizations today.
Right, and is there any technology that you would recommend to help them ease the process?
In terms of remote working, I think many companies have actually gone into the use of Zoom, for example. Or, because of what we have heard about Zoom, some companies actually ban the use of Zoom, but other video conferencing tools and technology, collaboration tools, and even tools that will help them to work together as teams. For us, we use Trello, for example, and we have a system of checking in daily as a team, which really helped us to align. And we have actually just implemented a communication platform, Beekeeper, to make sure that the team is able to be aligned in terms of work and social activities, sharing of our lives, basically staying connected.
Right. And what I gather, I think, is, what you're saying is communication is really key during this time. And I do agree, because internal comms should be succinct, transparent, and relevant to our situation, with an ability to reach the right people at the right time. Otherwise, important messages get lost.
Absolutely.
I guess, improving internal communications could perhaps be one of the most important digital transformation projects at this time.
Very, very key, I would say. In fact, the internal communications part is in some instances more important to ensure it's in place before you think about external communication. Because
right.
When internal communication starts to break down, when people start to work very separately, you actually can see shifts, you can see cracks starting to form. And I think, over this period of time, since the government in Singapore has mandated these work from home measures, we have seen companies that really have to work that much harder in order to ensure that their teams continue to collaborate well.
Right. Thank you, Evelyn. Moving on, some organizations have already practiced telecommuting long before COVID, like you said, right? But with the circuit breaker, for essential services, surely the ripple effects are much greater. Moving on to Lee, with financial services being an essential service, how does the COVID and circuit breaker impact workers and their day-to-day operations in general?
Cool, thank you, Jeremy. I guess there's two core things within a Singapore context. The first is regulatory. So it's for anyone, if I think about insurance specifically, anyone who's dealt with an insurance agent is used to having to meet them face to face, right? And so there's been a really interesting disparity between two sets of organizations, one whom were already ahead of the curve and so were prepared for this, and the others who were not. But a lot of the caution or the speed at which people could adopt was not so much based on the organizations themselves, but actually guidance from regulators, because the last thing you want to do, right, is have someone sell someone a financial policy or a credit card or something in a way that is illegal, because the ramifications for that. So kind of, you wanted to run fast, but necessarily weren't willing to, or others that had actually thought about this 2 years ago and were already doing things a certain way. So there's that kind of lens to it. The second lens to that, and this is the most surprising one to me, is the pace at which digital within financial services has been adopted in Singapore. Because I naturally think of Singapore as the world leader in innovation for everything, right? DBS is the world's best digital bank. But actually, when you think about, if I look at life insurance, for example, life insurance, Singapore is the second worst performing life insurance market for digital transactions in Asia. The only country they beat, I'm sure they're proud, is Malaysia. It's like 33% and 32%. But even places like Thailand, India, Hong Kong are all in advance of that. And so there's kind of two layers of it. One was the regulatory and the challenges that had to be overcome there. And secondly is almost the cultural, that you still sit down and have a coffee and, still do a lot of things in the old way and more relationship driven than that. And so those have been probably the two real things that have that have had to kind of be looked at.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So business as usual practices have taken a back seat. Thrown out a window basically. We are seeing a big shift in the habits of behaviors of consumers. So businesses are scrambling to move from offline to online to market their products. There's a rise in the number of webinars, as you can see. So how and what are some innovative ways in which companies could operate during this time to cope with the situation? Yeah,
so that's a good question. And I guess my answer could be kind of controversial here, because my personal viewpoint on this is, what is the definition of innovation, right? Because if we look at things, if we take away the lens of what we all do in the office every day, is sending emails when not at their desk innovative? No, we've been able to do this for the last 20 years, right? Is the concept of Skype revolutionary? No, we've had this since 2003, 2004. So is video conferencing or the ability to telecommute in a way innovative? No. If we think about WhatsApp and the ability to communicate or manage communications, if we think about Dropbox, Google Drives, VPN, SharePoint, just flexible working hours, is any of this innovative? And so if I was to be overly harsh, I would argue that those firms that are struggling to, look at these innovative solutions now, I'd actually point a spotlight back at them and say, what were you doing for the last 20 years? And I know that's going to be overly harsh and that may be offensive to some, but the truth is that a lot of these practices have been around. There were 4 million people working remotely in the US in 1997. So the technology's been there. It's been more, I think, innovative in terms of people actually thinking and taking a step back and going, hey, why do we actually have to be in the office every day? And if I think about that from an Aviva lens, Aviva also, we're an insurance company. Insurance is not always the most, disruptive. from that lens, not to be disparaging to the industry, because there were many smart people and awesome products. But, you know, even for us, I think we have 93% of our people working remotely now. But the question was, why didn't we have this before? You know, so I think that's more the innovation I would look at, is just people actually questioning more, why weren't we doing this before, than the technology, because I think all the solutions were there.
Right. So the outbreak hasn't really triggered a need to push the boundaries of innovation, but maybe acting as a catalyst to what was eventually
more as a catalyst of. There were obviously organizations that are, you know, even us in Singapore, and I'm conscious, I know there are people on this webinar not from Singapore, but, you know, restaurants now finally selling on Deliveroo because they weren't before. You know, there's obviously businesses that are affected by this, like in manufacturing or manual labor or so on, who are having to reevaluate their entire business model. But I think for the bulk of the traditional white collar kind of career paths we have, if you used a laptop or a computer, you never had to be in the office in the first place, right?
Right. Thanks, Lee. Okay, let's move on to speaking about people, you know, in the company. Yeah. So in some companies, employees enjoy working from home entirely, you know, as it fits the business model. They have been doing it for some time now. So, however, there are those who find adjusting a huge challenge. So the sudden change could very well affect productivity, engagement, and staff morale. So back to you, Lee. I have another question. How do companies keep employees engaged and motivated during this challenge?
So that's a good question. And I think there were two answers to this, because there's the one which is about managing remote employees and keeping them engaged, and then keeping them engaged in this environment, right? Because the high level answer would be, there shouldn't be much difference. Fundamentally, if a manager is doing their job correctly, you know, so like me with my team, I'll hold my hand up here and say, look, I have a team, I'm a manager. If I am selling their objectives correctly, I've provided them with a purpose, and I'm measuring the output in the right way, then they're going to be doing those tasks whether they're in the office or not, you know, at a high level. Whether the work in the office or out of the office, the norm is relatively the same. But I think what this is exposed from a traditional working from home model is it exposes employees and managers that weren't necessarily that productive in the office before, but could get away with it because that employee looked really, really busy because they were sat at the desk the whole time, but they were looking at their smartphone on Facebook or whatever else, right? And likewise with some of the managers, especially people who are micromanagers, all of a sudden they can't keep on checking on the work every hour. So then it's like, well, actually, what are they doing with their time in terms of that? So there's that kind of answer I have there. I think the biggest struggle with this that you highlight is in this specific time, these aren't normal work from home times, right? Like I know someone who's just quit her job because she's got the full flexibility. She's got a very supportive husband, but she's also got 3 kids under the age of 10. And one of them just had to make a decision, not because they can't balance the working from home itself. It's just they're also trying to homeschool 3 children under the age of 10, right? And I think that's the biggest struggle with this. And it's on organizations to look at employees and actually say, you know what, forget about work-life balance. We need to look at work-life integration, right? If you've got 3 kids and they're under 10, I'm not expecting you to be online from 9 till 6. Maybe you're going to get in a couple of hours at 7 till 9 before the kids are doing their stuff. Maybe you're going to do a few hours in the evening, but whatever you need to do, as long as you hit your deliverables, it doesn't matter whether you're working 2 hours a day or 9 hours a day, as long as you're getting the work done and which hours those are in the day. And it's employers having that flexibility around the engagement to go that extra mile, to understand that these aren't normal work from home times either, because normally you don't have your wife or your husband or your children or, you know, even just a dog if you're single and living alone, right? To manage all of that. And I think that's the core around the engagement, really, that firms need to be looking at now.
Actually, it's interesting you said that. If I may jump in quickly, Jeremy, just to share.
Sure.
I think one of the challenges, you know, even when we speak with our associates, our friends, is that people are actually putting in far more longer hours than before.
True. That's true.
So, I think engagement is there, but I think the other thing to watch out for is burnout, which is,
Right.
I think, something that is very real, because you could, in the past, go out for a 1 hour lunch with your colleagues and then come back. But these days,
Now we're doing 10-minute lunches.
Exactly. So I think these are, the issues that we need to be very, concerned about, because it can actually cause fatigue, burnout, and it can really affect the well-being of our workforce and our teams,
Right.
which could eventually affect engagement and performance.
Right.
They're all
Hold that thought.
interconnected.
Sorry, cut in. Hold that thought. We'll get to the next point,
Sure.
on mental health. But I would like to rope in Nina. Do you have some thoughts to share from your perspective?
Thanks, Jeremy. Like Lee said, these are not normal times. This is not a normal time of working at home. These are very extraordinary times. The lines have blurred between your personal life and your professional life, and it's all got intertwined now. So I think the first thing first is that the CEO is no longer a CEO, but a chief empathy officer now. It's really important that this comes from top down, this culture of empathy. And let's also realize that, if you look at the research, the top 4 things that people are worried about, and the number 1 is job security, health, childcare and schooling, personal finances. So I think we need to be mindful, and the leaders need to be mindful of this when they are dealing with their employees and their staff. And they should not forget to ask, how are you doing? The work, of course, is important, but you need to take care of people, you need to take care of each other, the organization and the ecosystem that we are in. So, these require extra empathy from everyone. In terms of engagement, there are so many other opportunities as well that it brings, because you have kind of a bit more time to, now you don't have to travel to an event like this. A lot of people who are attending this probably may not have traveled to CBD to see us, but they are probably jumping in. So similarly, learning and development, online courses. So, companies can encourage their team to take on a bit more of those fronts as well, and make them feel a bit more, loved and, engaged.
Yes, I totally agree, Nina. I'm aligned with you on that. So moving on, it's a topic that I personally take very seriously. It's the element of mental health of the workforce. There's always been a stigma surrounding mental health, especially true in developing countries in Asia, perhaps even in Singapore. But now more than ever, companies have to be more open and accepting of mental health issues in the workforce and provide support for those who suffer from it. Especially so for those who are living alone and confined to their homes 24/7. And it must be tough, emotionally, psychologically, and not to mention the struggling parents with young children who are undergoing home-based learning. So back to you, Lee. Are there practices in your organizations to address employees' mental health issues and ensure their well-being is being taken care of?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. It's always a tough one, though, because of the cultural taboos, as you point out, in not necessarily in Singapore, but in Asia as a whole. From an official programs point of view, there are helplines, support lines, all of that kind of stuff. But I think the biggest thing that kind of, if I think about me and my team, one of the things that just putting the emphasis on is not so much the formal programs, because I think those are, I don't think they give much value to the audience. Everyone's kind of, relatively up to date with the helplines and the government lines and, the official channels. But it's actually just building it into, as Nina and Evelyn were saying, the engagement overall. And just taking that extra step, like, with my team the other weekend, I actually set my team an objective for the weekend, which was to reach out to everyone they know who is living alone, and just actually take that time to have a call. One of my best mates in the world, he's a single guy living alone in the UK, about 300 miles away from his parents. So, it's just taking that time to actually be empathetic, not just within the workplace or from well, from an employee point of view, but just taking that step back and looking at everyone as humans and having a human empathy around this right now. And obviously doing that within the workplace as well. There's a guy in our HR team who's he's an expat, he's a single guy, he's living alone at the moment. He hasn't been, he hasn't seen another human being for like 6 weeks. So every time, I don't email him or WhatsApp him or whatever. Every time I want to talk to him, I give him a call. So it's a lot of the little things, I think, that are making up a lot more of it than just the official big programs, because those are well documented. They were, around mostly before that. And also, as has been rightfully pointed out by the other two on the panel, is taking into account that burnout factor as well. Because one of my team turned around to me very early on, because they'd never worked from home remotely before. And I was preparing all of my team, when I was working in London many years ago, I was in a global role, and I used to wake up at 5 a.m. for Asia, and I was still on the line at 10 p.m. for the US, right? And so I went through that firsthand. And so I was telling them, hey, look, you need to get to a point where you need to tell me clear boundaries. Right. So they're waking up early, and they're choosing to start work at like 7:30 in the morning. And so actually working with them to put in place that I'm not allowed to message them after 5 o'clock. I've done a similar thing. I do not look at my emails after 5:30 because I'm looking at my emails at 7 a.m. And everyone's got my mobile, so if there's an emergency, someone's going to die, or WhatsApp me. Actually just putting in place that kind of stuff. Others are choosing to work until 10 o'clock at night every day, but they're taking 2 hours out between like 2 and 4 to do some stuff with the kids and get in a workout video. So there's a lot of kind of things that are in place, but almost informally. And I think this is where what Nina was saying about chief empathy officers and just managers just being able to understand and have that compassion, and starting to treat people as human beings, not workers who are there to do what they're told. And, that's really what I'm seeing firsthand for us as an organization. Lots and lots of groups of this. People are setting up Zoom chats to have lunch together, or to do, we had 50 people doing, we're still doing some engagement activities. So we're still doing company yoga. We're obviously doing it remotely. And so 50 people are signing on at 6 p.m. to do yoga workouts together on Zoom, but it's just trying to foster that sense of community and making sure we're not forgetting them.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Quickly moving on to Evelyn, back to you. You had some thoughts on this just now. Yeah, could you maybe share?
Yes, so I was sharing that companies, leaders, co-workers, we all really need to keep a lookout for each other and how we actually manage our own work. I think Lee brought up a good point about setting boundaries. I think that is essential for the sake of our mental well-being, and something that we have just put in place, and we will be just trying it out for the first time ourselves as a team, is to introduce a system of having a buddy, because we realize that, the manager or the senior leaders, they may not always have enough time to just engage sufficiently on a one-on-one basis with everyone. And we feel that with a buddy system, it's really helpful, because it means that you have someone to turn to, and it could be about work, or it could be completely, random, anything, and I feel that that could be something that all of us could need, just to have that support in the workplace, and knowing that you're not alone. I think that's an important resource that we can think about. So we're just trying it out ourselves, see how it goes.
Great, Evelyn. And just to add, I think feeling supported by managers in the area of health is definitely a top differentiator for employees. And those who feel supported also feel leadership is effectively leading the organization through the pandemic, right? Okay, so quickly, in the interest of time, moving on, Nina, let's talk about hiring. During this time, with the current layoffs and hiring freeze across many industries, how has recruiting changed during COVID-19?
Yeah, it's interesting, because on one hand, you have a certain segment of the industry which has gone into a freeze mode, layoffs, and everything is doom and gloom, And on the other side, there are very, very buoyant industries like the Amazons and the delivery companies and the e-commerce, logistics, and so on. So it is a very odd time here. So of course, I think we also have to remember that companies, especially the companies who are smart, are not just working for today. They are working for today, tomorrow, and day after tomorrow. And yes, today's need is to have social distancing and technology. So obviously, the paramount importance is how do we cut short the disruption and move to the next phase, and quickly adapt to the new change. So hiring, I think, is still happening. And whether it is whether it's a small company or a large company, of course the most buoyant industries are hiring, but even tech companies are hiring. We continue to hire. We have to also remember that companies who have a very strong campus program uh, they cannot miss the cycle. The students are going to come out now in the summer. If they miss the cycle, they're going to be lapped up by the competition. So hiring is going on. Hiring is still happening. Where it is not happening is perhaps in very, very senior positions. When it comes to a CEO change or a CXO change, people are saying, let's hang in there, let things stabilize, let's not have too many moving parts. So that is one big change. I think also for the critical roles, companies are adopting a measure to give it internally and have more job rotation rather than bring somebody from outside, for very, very mission critical roles. So I think that's the other shift that has happened. So a lot of importance is being given to internal mobility, job rotations, and, but of course the bottom line is that everybody is expected to do much more work. They're expected to work harder than what they are working at the moment. So yeah, I mean, but again, just like we jumped into this, humans are such that we adapt very quickly. When all of this settles, we will jump back to the normal again. But of course, some things will remain forever. For example, more acceptance around working from home and so on.
Right. And, having conducted hundreds of interviews myself, face-to-face interviews are tricky as it is. Video interviews should be, even more challenging. So what are your thoughts on that? And, for those who are still hiring, what best advice could you offer to hiring managers to approach their recruitment efforts? And also maybe speak a bit about technology during this time.
Sure. Now, of course, as you know, Zopa as a founder, having spent 20 years in HR, hiring, executive search, the reason I set up Zopa was purely because we wanted to get rid of subjectivity in hiring. And now we are finally seeing that actually come to fruition, because companies are now really lapping up technology. They are relying on AI. They are relying on all the additional tools that technology is bringing. So artificial intelligence is taking a big front seat. Video interviewing, and this I'm talking about the video interviewing on demand, which is you get a link, you don't have to, it's not a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams, it's a link you get, and you can do it within 48 hours. So, so that's a great technology again. And in a way, companies feel it helps them to take a step back and not get influenced by the biases, and kind of look at their hiring a bit more meaningfully and a bit more objectively. So yeah, there's a lot of good that is coming out as well, Jeremy.
Thank you, Nina. Moving on, I'll throw this question to all the panelists. To thrive in today's uncertain environment, leaders must become digital triathletes, strategist, innovator, and driver. Can you share your thoughts on what digital leadership entails, and what do HR leaders need to do to meet these expectations? Evelyn, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. And I think we've discussed about this earlier with this COVID-19 situation. It has really propelled us, globally right into the adoption of technology in a very big way. So indeed, as HR leaders and other leaders, how do we respond to this? I think for companies that are or were considering, how much to invest in technology, very clearly now they can see that it's actually not a matter of should I or should should I not? It's really how far should I go into it? So I think that's something that is not a question anymore. And I think then it's the duty of the leadership and HR team as well, who are involved, to really do that due diligence to understand what technology can do for them and how much they can leverage. At the end of the day, as I always like to say, it's about the mindset. Technology is an enabler, but you need to be prepared to really leverage it to its fullest potential. So I think with that, it's actually about having the right vision, having a very strategic vision. And I think with today's environment, companies are really pushed to reimagine their entire business at scale, because the way we deliver services, the way we produce our products may change. The business model, could change overnight. And we have seen how some companies are really doing that, really pivoting and using technology to enable them to do that. So I think the ability to be very strategic, to respond with agility in today's complex and highly ambiguous environment is very key. But it's not easy. So I would say that teams really play a big role. It's not just about individual leaders, it's about teams coming together collectively and really being very clear about what they can pursue. Case in point, for example, Airbnb. I'm sure many of you will have read about how they are actually relooking at their entire model. And with that strategy, they are thinking about what sort of skill sets they need in order to succeed. So that has to translate into an understanding of the kind of talent that you need as an organization. And I think that's very key, because without the right people, it's going to be very hard to succeed. I could go on and on.
Thank you, Evelyn. Over to you, Lee. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so look, I'll try and keep this brief because Evelyn's covered a lot of it there. Look, for me, look, I've taken multiple companies through digital transformation now. One, digital transformation is not new, right? Like, I always joke that digital transformation, the only companies that talk about this are the ones who didn't do what they were supposed to do 5, 10, 15 years ago, right? Digital transformation, from a technology point of view, is actually the easiest thing in the world, right? You buy the technology, you implement it, right? But the truth behind digital transformation is it's about people, not technology. Because what happens to most of these firms is they go out and go, okay, we're going to implement this new video interview software, or this new HR system, or this new way to acquire customers. They spend however much money they spend, they implement the technology, and then no one uses it because they haven't focused on the people part. And the true success of any organization and any leader that wants to take their company through digital or their team through digital is to focus on the change management side of things, right? Because the technology itself is meaningless. I see so many organizations, so let's say their process is 10% efficient at the moment. They buy the piece of technology, put everyone in a 30-minute training session, and then they expect them to be at 100% usage on the following week. It doesn't work that way. It's about taking organizations from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 100, maybe over 18 months. And maybe you implement the technology today, but people aren't using it efficiently until the middle of next year. But it's about focusing on that journey beyond it. And the other element to this that I've been thinking about lately is, basically creative destruction. The truth is that 99% of organizations are not are not doing well with digital. There's a reason 50% of the Fortune 500 has disappeared in the last decade. It's because they're not willing to do what Netflix did with creative destruction, which is to take your existing business model and turn it on its head. Netflix actually still has a DVD delivery service. They don't make any money in it anymore. But the organization that has to be willing to take that long-term view as well. So it's the courageousness of a leader to do that and to reevaluate the business model and push along in that and take the people with them, because the technology is not the answer on its own.
Great points, Lee. Thank you. Moving over to Nina. before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we are a HR tech firm ourselves. So I would just say three things are the most important. One is adopt, use, collaborate. Like Evelyn and Lee just said, technology is as good as you use it. So you have to have a culture of adoption and using it and making sure that you get best out of the technology. So that I think that culture of adoption and acceptance and really kind of getting the best out of it is very, very important, which we are beginning to see now, which is an important interesting shift.
Right. Thank you, Nina. So moving on, amidst the gloom, surely it hasn't been all bad news. Personally, it has been a steep learning curve for all of us. But in Golden Equator, we have seen an increase in employee engagement. So we use Office Vibe to conduct surveys, collect feedback, and our engagement scores have actually been increasing in the last 2 months, hitting a high actually. So, and it has also given management the time to take a step back, to reflect, reevaluate our current position and long-term goals. Could you guys very quickly just share some wins you see coming out of this whole situation?
Yeah, I can dive in. I think the way the hiring is going to change, starting from the way things are now. It's going to be more skill-based hiring. So I think the good that is coming out, one of the biggest things that I'm really excited about is that more women are going to be in the workforce, because the acceptance of working from home, flexi working, is going to be something that is not this exotic thing only some companies offer. Secondly, house husbands. We will see a lot more house husbands getting involved in the workforce, and I think that is very, very cool. Thirdly, and very close to my heart, is people with, for example, mild mental health or autism. There'll be a lot more acceptance to work from home, and again, it's all about skill-based hiring. So they'll be hired for the right skills and to get the job done. But I also feel that the way work is, this is going to also change the way people work. That the typical 9-to-5 work is going to become a bit more disrupted. People are going to be a bit more demanding on flexi working, and people might tend to kind of take multiple projects than be kind of attached to just one 9-to-5 assignment.
Okay, thank you, Nina. Evelyn?
I think, there is actually going to be a lot of good that's coming out of this, and we can see it already. The society is actually demonstrating so much goodwill and generosity. And I think that actually is the same for the ecosystem that we work within. We see people who are genuinely interested to partner. And I think that could lead to awesome things, because it could lead to new ways of working, new alliances, new revenue streams. So a lot of new things I think that could emerge. So I think that's the good part of it. And I think in terms of the workforce, people are becoming a lot more agile in learning new things and having a very open mindset, and just being a lot more adaptable, which I think is really good for us, because we're just getting more resilient, and it's helping us to be also more innovative. So I think there's a lot of good that's coming out of it. You see a lot of creative ideas, new ways of doing things that nobody thought would be possible. So I think that's the awesome things that we can look forward to.
Thank you, Evelyn. And Lee?
Cool, I'll keep this quick because I'm conscious of time. But number one, badly run businesses with outdated practices are not going to survive this. I think that's the biggest win for all employees around the world, because that results in better working conditions, better working environments, more flexibility with their own career, work-life balance, etc., etc. Whether that happens today or over the next 5 years, that's up for debate. But it is what will ultimately win out. The other thing I want to highlight is what Nina just said, particularly with people with disabilities. We had a new starter in our very own team this week, who is a person with disability. And I was having phone calls with the leader of our biggest business unit here in Singapore. One of our buildings is very, very old. So it's very hard to get people, for example, with wheelchairs into the office. So as an organization, you know, we have people with disabilities in our workforce. We have had for many years, and we obviously want to continue to expand that. Now that we don't need to worry about getting that person into the office, that opens up our ability, and we're actually going to be reaching out not just to this community, but I'm actually going to be reaching out to all of our competitors later on this month to try and set up some sort of community where we can now, as an industry, actually do more for this group of people. Because in Singapore, it's something like 94 or 96% of people with disabilities actually don't have a job. So, you know, in Singapore, that's a very big win.
That's great, Lee. I love that story. So moving on, we have the Q&A. There are a number of questions. We have 5 questions that came in. So let's get underway with that. So the first question is from Shirley. Her question is, would employers be looking at new sets of qualities and expectations when hiring, retaining, and managing resources? What is important for me or opportunities for me as an employee to come out on top post-COVID-19?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Yeah, I think the skill set is going to change. One is, like I said, you know, jobs are going to be more skill-based. So there's going to be much more skill-based hiring as opposed to broad-based. So, you know, so I think that is very good, which is going to again lead to a cluster of multiple things that a person can do. Yeah, so I think flexibility, adaptability, agility to change is something that companies are absolutely going to be very, very finicky about. You know, how soon can you just, you know, just switch on and switch off and, you know, and jump into and change out of the situation. So I think flexibility, learning ability, learning on the job, skill-based hiring, I think that's really going to be key.
Thank you, Nina. Moving on to the next question. This is from Balas. How do you think possible burnout should be managed during turbulent times? Remote working means much more freedom, but as Evelyn mentioned, for someone who is not used to it, can be much more frustrating since a lot of people are working much more extended hours. Evelyn, would you like to take this question?
Sure. So I can share a little bit about my routine. So I realized that when I don't have enough time outside, you know, it kind of drives me bananas, and, you know, the cabin fever kicks in. So what I do is I make sure I have enough time exercising outside. So every morning I spend some time doing that. I would take walks at least, or I would, you know, just jump on my bicycle and make sure I get some fresh air, some sunshine, you know, and have some time just to be with my own thoughts, which is so important because, you know, when you're in an environment where you're not alone and, you know, and there's a lot going around you, you need to make sure that you preserve that me time so that there is enough time for you to process your thoughts, so that you feel that you're energized for the day and that you get clarity of mind, which I feel is very important. So I think just some time to shut yourself out of the noise is very important. Build that in. And I do that again in the evening. I always make sure that, you know, I do some form of exercise, or I get out again in the evening. So that's my routine. And I find that it's also very important to say that when I have done enough for the day, I'm going to stop here, you know, and I'm just not going to work anymore. So I think those are important reminders to ourselves to really take care of ourselves and not to actually work ourselves into the ground, because that way we are not going to be, you know, useful to anyone. So I think just being very mindful of that.
Thank you, Evelyn.
And Jeremy, if I can just add on one thing to that, if you don't mind. I think the core word that we should be keeping in mind when it comes to that, and Evelyn alluded to it, but is simple accountability. You know, so as employees, we have an employment contract. It says we're meant to work 8 hours a day or whatever it is, right? So there comes a point where as individuals, we just need to take that accountability as well and go, no, I'm turning off, right? You know, and that's something I think that has to come out of this, is people to take more responsibility for what they're actually doing as well. You can't just blame the boss. The boss may want you to work 15 hours a day. Legally, you don't have to.
Yeah, and if I could jump onto that as well, and I think maybe there is also some anxiety because you feel that I need to prove my worth. You know, I need to make sure I'm delivering, and that, you know, my boss can see that, you know, I'm getting all these things done. So I think perhaps, you know, that's another challenge that more of us are struggling with, you know, trying to make sure that our work is visible enough, and having to prove that we are truly, you know, worth our wages, so to speak. So I think, again, you know, how the leaders work with their teams and give them that sense of security is very, very critical. That definitely helps with, I think, the mental well-being as well.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Sure.
Next question comes from Adam. There has been a lot of discussion around how the world has changed forever now. Does the panel think it has, or will we just go back to the way we were very quickly?
100%. It's definitely changed. What will happen, so without wanting to give everyone a very long history lesson, the Black Death, right? If you go back to then, that fundamentally changed, you know, the worker-boss relationship as well, right? But it didn't happen overnight. Back then, you had what was known as the serfs and the landowners. So the landowners would just have you work until basically for free, and you know, die or whatever, until you die or whatever else. You know, when the Black Death happened, you know, that changed the working conditions. And so what happened was a certain group of employees stood up and went, well, hold on a minute, I'm not working for free anymore. And if, you know, and all of a sudden they, you know, I know my value and my worth, therefore I'm going to go and work for this landowner over here because he's offering better conditions. That's fun, you know. And the macroeconomic situation of that was, before the Black Death, Eastern Europe was rich and Western Europe was poor, right? And Western Europe adapted and Eastern Europe didn't, and the rest is history, as they say. That's what will happen here. Whether it happens today, as soon as this is over and COVID is gone, employers will try to go back to how it was, right? For the most part. What's going to happen, whether that is this year, next year, definitely over the course of this decade, is an entire generation of workers now know they do not have to be in the office 9 to 5. They don't have to be there for those meetings. They don't have to be at that training center for the training. They don't have to meet that customer for that sale. And so what's going to happen over the next 12 months, 5 years, 10 years, is employees are going to self-select themselves out of organizations that refuse to change. And those organizations that don't adopt modern practices and try to stick to the status quo of what it was like before will cease to exist, the same way as has happened through every major upheaval of the workforce and technological transformation.
Right. Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, if I can add here, you know, my view is, you know, it's not all or nothing, right? Right now, it's nothing. It's like we have made a dramatic change. So we're going to be somewhere in the middle with a lot of awareness around us on things that we thought were not possible. For example, we didn't think that we could do client meetings online. We had to travel 12 hours to go and meet a client to do that deal. So I think some of those good practices are going to come through. So we're going to be somewhere, take the good from this and be a bit more mindful of how we're going to be working going forward.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Nina. So moving on to, we have a few more questions, so I hope to cover all of them. So moving on to, this one is from Asir. It's always easier said than done, setting boundaries. But a lot of employees are still struggling with this whole sense of isolation. Due to the situation, given that we are all confined to a predefined space, how could we encourage and inspire our employees to still have the drive to carry on working efficiently and with positivity? So very quickly, could I throw this out to the panel?
Actually, I think that's a great point because that emphasizes our humanness, right? So it goes to show that we still actually, in many ways, desire to have that human connection, that human touch. So while it's true that a lot of things can now be done virtually, remotely, I think that point actually reinforces the fact that we do embrace that, you know, that part of us. So I feel that yes, it's difficult to put in place boundaries sometimes, but it could be a very simple thing. You know, I think just now Lee talked about yoga class, you know, as a team. I think those things can actually be great to do together. And if you can't do it together, do it on your own. Just lots of free YouTube exercise videos, you know, when the clock hits 6, just stop and do something that is not work. So go and get some exercise. And it's really important that we get our exercise during this time, because we are just a lot more sedentary, you know, than usual. It affects our ability to think clearly even. So I think those are little things. And meal times, you know, perhaps instead of just a 10-minute lunch, you know, stretch it out, read something that's non-work related, connect with your friends. I think that has also come, you know, to the fore a lot more, that people are connecting with people a lot more because they feel they want that human connection. So reach out to people who are not your co-workers, for example. Do something with your family. I would say perhaps those are the things that you could try out.
Right. Thank you, Evelyn. The next one is for Nina. We have a number of significant companies announcing work from home for most staff until at least 2021. Will this impact effective hiring? Can a person or even whole teams be hired totally based on remote interviews and then proceed to work remotely and never ever meet their manager or colleagues?
Yeah, we've just hired 2 people who are totally working from home. I hope I will meet them soon. But I think it's possible. Again, you know, companies are going to, of course, be very clear about what is the position they're hiring, what are the skills they're hiring. They're going to be much more mindful about what is going to be, you know, the role of this person. So it's going to be a bit more structured from that perspective. You know, again, like I will repeat that there's going to be a lot of skill-based hiring. You know, I need the skill, I need somebody in Python, or I need somebody in inside sales or customer success. So it's going to be very, very clearly defined. So I think hiring is definitely going to go on. Companies cannot, I mean, at least companies who are, you know, moving forward cannot afford not to, you know, if you need a customer success manager, you need a customer success manager. So it is very true. I think a lot of remote workers may not even meet their colleagues. But and I think this is definitely going to spur a lot of you know, further gig economy. And you know, so yeah, I mean, like I'll repeat again, people will land up, there is going to be a significant shift in an individual's attitude towards work as well. They may hold multiple projects and instead of just being confined to one. So long story short, yes, it is hiring is happening. Our platform is being used by a lot of clients. They are hiring. So, you know, that is still going on.
Okay, thank you, Nina. The next question comes from Gibson. What does the panel think major changes to the workforce work behavior post COVID-19? Lee has already you know, touched on that a bit. Maybe I'll throw this over to Evelyn and Nina.
Yeah, I can jump in here. You know, I think KPIs are going to be extremely outcome based. You know, when you are in a company and you know, you can see what the others are doing. Sometimes there is that little bit of extra indulgence if the results are not met. Unfortunately, I think the expectation on outcome is going to go up. You know, so because the focus on effort is not going to be visible. So so there is going to be a bit more demand on you know, on so it's definitely going to be very outcome based management, especially when you're working remotely.
Thank you, Nina.
Yeah, and if I may add, I would think that leaders probably have a different view regarding constraints. So the question would be, is this indeed a true constraint, as to why, certain approaches or certain methodologies may not work? Because I think what has transpired has shown us that in many ways, lots of things are actually possible. Things can be done in a very creative and innovative way. So I think there would be that expectation that, that individuals or teams would actually go the extra mile to innovate and to come up with, more creative solutions and to work around constraints. So I think that would actually be an expectation, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. The next question, due to these times, should job seekers expect a quicker response or be more understanding that hiring is, slowed down due to adapting to the new norm? Perhaps Nina could share.
Yeah, like I said, I don't agree that the hiring has slowed down. Some industries, of course, have completely frozen, and there are others that are very, very buoyant. So, it's a very subjective, it depends on where you are hiring and which sector of the market it is. Clearly, if you're going to, sign up for a hospitality position, it's not going to move that quickly. So I think you need to be a little more mindful about where you're applying if you are in a hurry as a job seeker to get into another role. So you need to kind of understand the dynamics of the ecosystem at the moment.
Thank you, Nina. Another one for you. What job sectors do you think are least affected by COVID?
Tech, tech is very friendly to remote working. They are open to that. It is not COVID that has driven them to be flexi timing or remote working. So they have, of course, adapted very, very quickly. There are some markets, of course, as we know, hospitality, which are badly hurt. Travel is badly hurt. Food preparation, cleaning, construction. So I would say that there are some which are very, very doing very well, the Amazons of the world and the Alibabas of the world, and whereas some are really struggling.
Thank you. And we have the last two questions. The next one comes from Hannah. How do you see business travel being factored back into work, especially as Singapore works out travel agreements with other countries? And how can we manage this for our staff? Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
I see Evelyn's also unmuted. Evelyn, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
No, I was just going to share my observation, which is that, China as a market is already, in some ways restarting, things are slowly going back to normal. Yeah. And you see a lot more domestic travel going on. So I think in time to come, Chinese companies, particularly based in Singapore, would probably start to have an expectation, that their people should start being a little bit more active in terms of, visiting their clients, those who are in sales and so on. So I think depending on how our government, eases the measures, there might actually, we might start seeing some level of travel simply because, the businesses need it, some of these businesses need it. But I would say overall, probably the response would be generally still pretty conservative because employees do need to feel like they're not overly risking themselves or, overly exposed. So I think it's balancing that and making sure that companies are very, very mindful and really watching out because we all know that, there's a real possibility of second wave returning, right, with what we have observed. Yeah.
And I'd add on to that just two things I guess I'd add on to that. One is you've just got the traditional, whenever there's a recession, the first thing that gets slashed other than the marketing budget is usually the business travel budget. So that would obviously have a knock-on effect in the short term. But I think the other thing with this is there's travel that would have, I think there's going to be a new question around what travel is actually necessary, right? Because before everything was hey, well, I need to go to China or Malaysia or wherever to do a deal. But like in this past week, I've signed a contract for a new technology solution. Never met the company. They're based in Australia, did everything via Skype, you know, and Teams and WebEx and Zoom. Like, you know, so did, you know, traditionally they would have flown over, they'd have done a presentation, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Didn't need to do any of that, you know. So I think it'd be more a case of people then looking at their budgets. And, you know, I've already seen some CFOs kind of realize, even now with office space, oh, hold on, we don't need an office for every single one of their employees. So once the money men get involved, I think, or the money women get involved, it just becomes that thing of, actually, why are you traveling in the first place? And I think there'll be some interesting changes on behavior. I don't know what they will be, but there's definitely going to be some sort of knock-on effect now that people realize they don't have to be in that office all the time, you know, in whichever location.
Great, thanks Lee. We have overrun on our time. I guess we could squeeze in one last question. This comes from Karine. Do you foresee a change in performance management measurement?
Should I take that as the HR person?
Short
answer is I hope so, but I hope so long before this situation anyway. I think, look, one of the honest truths around performance management, and I've seen a number of my LinkedIn followers in the attendee list, so they see me rant about this regularly, but it's how performance is measured anyway, right? You know, how many people are doing effective goal setting, actually measuring performance throughout the year so that the year-end performance process is actually valid, right? And, you know, Evelyn is the HR consulting person, and yourself, Jeremy, you will know this anyway. It will be one of the biggest questions you get from all of your clients all of the time, right? How do we actually measure and make sure we promote the right person, or so on and so forth? What this will do, or what this should do, is it's taken away a lot of the biases in the process, right? Because I may like Evelyn more because we have lunch every day. Therefore, when it comes to performance review, Evelyn then gets a slightly better review than you, Jeremy, right? Or we go for beers and, you know, a lot of that. Or I see you working late every night, so you must be working hard. So what this should actually do, or at least the companies that perform better after this, is actually selling proper SMART goals that are, you know, there for a specific purpose, and then are awarding, promoting pay rises, bonuses on actually hitting deliverables, not a set of inputs or FaceTime in the office or whatever else. So I think that's what the outcome would be. It was the outcome that was needed beforehand. And I think this might be, especially if there's less people in the office moving forward, the accelerator needed to make that happen.
Great, thanks Lee. I do agree with you. Okay, it's been a privilege to be speaking with all my panelists. There were definitely some invaluable takeaways for me. You know, thank you to everyone who took time away to participate in this webinar. I'll now hand over to Sophia to wrap this session up.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you, panelists, for the great insights. Lee, Evelyn, Nina, fantastic webinar we have today. So, and thank you, participants, for joining today's webinar. I know that there are a couple of questions there that we haven't managed to address, but we'll address this offline. So at the same time, let me, share with you next Thursday, we have another webinar, which is on the technology for the betterment of humanity. We will feature Mr. Lim Hui Jie. He is the founder of Vision Group. So he's also this year's recipient of National Youth Entrepreneur Award by Action Community for Entrepreneurship. So I look forward to joining you and Hui Jie for the session. And thank you again, panelists. Fantastic session. We hope to have you participants to join us again for similar webinars. So before you end, after this session, please help us to fill up the survey for us to improve on our webinars as well. So thank you, have a good evening, and everyone stay safe, keep well. Thank you very much.